Hey, Erinn, how you doing today? Good to see you.
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. I'm doing fantastic. How's your day been so far?
It's been good. It's been busy. I feel like I'm hitting the ground running here Monday morning, but it's not a bad problem to have.
Yeah. Like it's a great start to the year, so like we can't really complain too much. Let's make 2025 a year to be productive. Like, would you agree?
I know. I feel like, and I try not to fall into the New Year's resolution trap where I bite off more than I can chew, but I'm trying to ride the wave at least. Like there's the motivation wave. So I'm on it for now, which is helpful.
Exactly. Yeah, so let the viewers know who you are, what you do, and why you do it, Erin.
Yeah. So I am Erinn Hoel. I'm a sex therapist and coach and the founder of Holistic Health and creator of the Desire to Fire program. So I work with women who are in great relationships but are really struggling with low desire because sex feels like a chore. And that is really hard to admit. And because a lot of times what happens is that they feel like something is wrong with them, that this is happening, but they want to have sex again. So I help them see that there is nothing wrong with them. They are not like somehow inherently broken. That's not what's happening. It's just because nobody teaches women how the system works, right? So I help them also know exactly what to do to start looking forward to sex again so that it is less stressful and more fun like it was in the early days and get back on the same team in the relationship so that they don't just feel like roommates, they feel like partners again.
Right. So, when you look back at your journey before you embarked on what you do now, what was the process like for you? And what was the moment that you decided that, like, this is actually what I want to do going forward? And what was your mindset at that time when you made that decision?
Yeah, so looking back on it, I always a little bit of backstory here. I was raised Catholic, so like did not talk about sex. It was a very taboo thing. Like was not something that we talked about, had conversations around. So it was very secretive. It was very taboo. And like probably once I got to college, starting to have more conversation with my friends, starting to have more, I was a psychology and gender studies major, so talking more about gender roles and sexuality and how all of this stuff plays out. And I started to realize that oh, we all struggle. A lot of us struggle to talk about sex. It's a very difficult conversation for the majority of us. And I started realizing that for so many women, like so many of my peers, sex was something that was really stressful. It was something that caused a lot of pressure. It's caused a lot of issues in relationships when they had different drives, which is so common, but like no one teaches us the tools we need to navigate this. So I was really interested in it. I found it really fascinating. It was one of those things where like as soon as the conversations would start, I was like, ooh, I want to know more about this. I want to talk about this. I've always been more comfortable asking these questions and getting into it once the door opens. So I just kind of took that and ran with it because I was seeing that so many women struggle with this and they feel alone in that. And then
Right.
they go to, there must be something wrong with me. I'm the reason that these issues are happening in my relationship when none of that is true, but we struggle alone with it. So it was really
Right.
kind of those conversations that I was seeing is so prevalent for so many women. That sucks. It doesn't have to be like that.
For sure. Now, you mentioned struggles. Like, we all go through different struggles in relationships that we've had previously, and we navigate through those to get to where we are now. And oftentimes, when people get into some type of a coaching or some type of field, like coaching, it tallies with their own life experience of like what they've been through, and
Mm.
they want to help people navigate through the same kind of a scenario. So, with that being said, what would you say some of your previous struggles have been in previous relationships? And would you say that you've had those similar type of struggles in terms of seeing sex as a chore within a relationship?
Mm.
Would you say that applied to you as well?
Yes, absolutely. One of the biggest reasons that I have gone into this field is that I wanted to understand myself. I wanted to understand what was going on for me. Because for me, for many, many years, sex was really painful. And I like didn't talk to anybody. I didn't even talk to my gyno about it. Like I was not having conversations about it because I assumed that it was just a me problem. And what happens when sex is painful, when it starts to feel like a chore, when you start to feel guilty because you're letting your partner down, is that your brain, which is your largest sex organ, starts to associate sex with something stressful. And we don't want to do things that stress us out. So we start to avoid it and we start to make excuses and we start to feel all of these really big, uncomfortable feelings around it. And so I want to understand why that was happening. I'm like, why do I watch all of these Hollywood movies and everybody's just in these throes of passion and it's so great and they're making, what does that mean? Am I the only one not having this experience? So yeah, I have been through it with feeling like sex is painful and feeling that it's a chore and feeling that guilt and the toll that's taking on the relationship. And I wanted to understand why that was happening for me, which is why I started this. And I was then seeing it's so, so prevalent that so many other women are feeling this way.
Right, right, yeah. So like you mentioned, like it was like things that were happening to you as well. And a lot of the time, like we have different sides of us, right? To trigger us into how we feel, right? So like to do with like the mind, the sapiosexual side of us needs to be stimulated and triggered in order to feed it through our entire body in the same way. So, what was the trigger for you that made you then be able to no longer see sex as a chore, but start to enjoy it again? Or what was that like for you to to switch over?
That's such a good question. And this is one of the main things that I work on with my women. Because as long as it feels like a chore, you're not going to want to do it, right? Like we do chores because we have to, but nobody's like, oh, I'm super excited to mop my floor. Like that's not how it works. So, such a good question that I talk about all the time. And how I conceptualize this is that arousal is a two-step process. When like desire drops, when it starts to cause issues in relationships, when all this stuff starts to cause more stress, what happens is we like get our horse blinders on and we think, okay, how do I have more sex? How do I have better sex? How do I have more orgasms? How do I not take as long in the bedroom? Whatever it is. And what happens is that that's only 50% of the equation, right? Like turning on the ons, communicating with your partner, figuring out what you like, making it more pleasurable. That's a really important part, but it's only 50%. And we tend to focus on that when the other 50% of the equation is how do we turn off the turnoffs? Right? When it comes to our brain, that largest sex organ, if we are stressed, if we are exhausted, if we feel like shit because we haven't been eating well, if we are constantly fighting with our partners in our relationship, this all creates stress and pressure and sends us into that activation mode with fight or flight, which is not a sexy feeling, right? We can't be in fight or flight and kick on the sex drive. So we have to turn that stuff off first. And that's such an important part of the equation that gets missed. So that's where I start with people because I'm like, I could give you the 10 tips to spice things up in the bedroom. It's not going to get you very far if there's all of this stress and this pressure wreaking havoc on your body and your system first. It's not going to get you the results you want.
Right, right. So, in your case, how were you able to turn off those turn-offs, would you say?
Great question because it's so individualized. So some of the common ones, I mean, stress is such a common, I'll just use that as an example because it's such a common part of the conversation today. And we talk about stress like it's an emotion, right? I'm feeling stressed, which means I feel overwhelmed, things feel chaotic, I'm overstimulated, whatever it is. But stress is very much a physical process in your body. It's that fight or flight. So that's where I started for myself. And that's where I start with a lot of my clients, because when you're in this activated state, your body goes through very real physical changes. Like parts of our brain go offline, so we can't troubleshoot and decision make the same way. Our heart rate elevates, our blood pressure skyrockets, our bronchial tubes dilate, and we're like, so we have the fast, short breathing, right? None of that makes for a safe, calm, enjoyable state alone, physically, let alone feeling like we're interested in sex in the first place. So calming the system is such an important piece to start because without that, it's like fighting an uphill battle. So things like stress outlets and sleeping well, because sleep is where the whole system resets. Eating well, having some of these conversations so you get on the same page because it's not one person's responsibility to fix the sex life. It's also a co-created thing. So some of the tools around the management of the system is so helpful because people think it's just me. I'm in my head about it. No, your system's working exactly as it should be. It's just responding to the stress activation, not to the sexy fun stimulation that you want it to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, speaking about like stress, a lot of people they immerse themselves in their career because they want success in their life, right? So it can
Yep.
cause a lot of stress when they immerse themselves so deeply in their career to the point that it's affecting their sex life and their intimate life because of the stress build up. But they don't know how to decrease the stress from work because they want to really go and get it, right? And but at the same time, they don't want to neglect their intimate life is affecting their relationship. So, in your opinion, how can they start to bridge that gap and create that balance between their professional and personal life to reduce that stress and to increase that intimacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. That makes me think about two things. One is consistency over intensity. That we think, all right, I have to like fully turn off from work or I have to like fully be engaged in this other thing. And sometimes that is tough. If you have had a long, stressful day where you worked for 12 hours and you were in it and you were in go mode, and then you go home and you're exhausted and you haven't eaten and maybe you haven't even peed all day long because you were in back-to-back meetings, you're fighting an uphill battle that time alone, right? So when I think about the stress outlets and calming the system and getting out of fight or flight, being consistent is more intense. It's more important than intense, right? Like I could go to an hour-long yoga class at the end of the day to slow things down, and that might be great. Or maybe I take 2 minutes and I do some breathing techniques. Or I take 5 minutes and I go outside in the yard with my dog and I throw the frisbee, right? That the consistency over intensity, I think, is really important because we get in these all or nothing mindsets, right? Where like I have to be on and I have to be the best at my job and the best in my relationship. And if I'm not, then I'm failing in all of these areas. So I think consistency over intensity is really important when it comes to starting to regulate the system, because if we experience stress every day, we need outlets for it every day, but that doesn't mean it has to take hours. It can be 10 to 15 minutes. And when it comes to like showing up and prioritizing your relationship, something else that makes me think about is scheduling. There's a lot of talk right now about scheduling sex like in this world, and people have very polarizing opinions, I'll say, on it. Because when you first hear that, especially if you're somebody that feels like sex is a chore, you're like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. Because now it's going to be on my calendar and it's going to be looming. And the closer it gets, the more I'm going to be stressed out about it. So there's a certain way that you have to go about this. But I think in general, just planning time together in relationships, whether it be for sex or whether it be like planning a date night or a vacation, is important because nothing just happens in our relationship, right? We have to make things happen if we want them to happen. Like, I don't just find myself on vacation. I need the time off, so I plan it and I budget for it, right? And we figure out where we're going to go. That nothing just happens, but we talk about sex like it's this easy breezy, spontaneous thing. So if you want more intimacy, you have to make the time for it also.
Right, right, right. And speaking about making time for things, sometimes people have partners that they feel like they make time for their boss, but they don't make time for them, right? Like they're putting their boss first, but they're ne never putting themselves, their partner first in the relationship. And sometimes the reaction of the partner is like, oh, this sounds like a gender roles and all this pressure, all these expectations. But at the same time, the partner will be like, well, your boss has certain expectations that you meet with no problem. But when it comes to this relationship, it's always up for debate. What is your opinion on these type of gender roles within relationships and this like kind of work dynamic that where like there's a lot of focus on pleasing the boss, but not necessarily in the same way pleasing your partner in the same kind of context. What is your viewpoint on that?
That's really interesting because it makes me think about how we like navigate different roles in different environments and show up in different ways, right? That like how I show up with my partner is different than how I show up with my clients, is different than how I show up when I go to the dentist, right? Like we show up differently in all these environments. And what it makes me think about, you're talking about setting expectations. And I think that's really important to be able to have open conversations and talk about when things aren't going well and talk about when things are hurting our feelings and we feel like we're not getting our best from our partner. And it's making me think about the concept between a notification and a request. So often what happens in relationships is we get to know this person very, very well. We have our same patterns of behavior. We assume they know what we're thinking. We assume they know that when you come home from work, I need you to greet me at the door and I want to hug and kiss and then I want to make dinner together and I want you to tell me about your day. When you might be in a totally different mindset base from being at work all day and having your boss yell at you and then having to go to that meeting, whatever it is. So this, I think, is really can be a helpful, tangible thing to use too, because mind reading gets us in trouble in relationships when we assume that we know what our partner is thinking and vice versa. But there's a difference between saying, I want you to show up with more presence like you do at work, than saying, here's how I would like you to show up when you get home. Because what happens is we give the notification. Classic example I use is the garbage needs to go out. I might say, Kayo, the garbage needs to come out or needs to go out. And you're like, great, that's a wonderful fun fact, Erinn. Thank you for telling me that. But what I was trying to say is, I want you to take the garbage out, please. Right? There's a difference in those two things. So thinking about what you are notifying your partner of versus what is the underlying request is so important because at the end of the day, they might just not know.
Right.
Right? Or you might say, I want to connect more. That's a wonderful notification, but what's the request there? How do you want to connect? What do you want that to look like? How do you want to feel together? And we get into trouble because it feels really obvious. And then we get frustrated because you're like, I'm asking for you to show up more, but you're not. You're just notifying instead of being specific about what it is you need.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And some people feel like, yeah, that's all well and good, but like it does feel a bit like constricted for them to have to deal with figuring their partner out all the time. And they start looking at different type of relationship dynamics, seeing if there's anything different for them out there that'll be more suitable for them and maybe like bring them a sense of freedom to be able to navigate in relationships. So they start looking at things like monogamy versus non-monogamy and things like that. So in that context, what is your viewpoint on monogamy versus non-monogamy for relationships?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because I think there's more of a conversation nowadays around different types of relationships and being able to really create something that is the best for you and not just based on what we think we should do. And so I'm also viewing the questions through the lens of sex and intimacy specifically because I'm primed to think about that stuff all the time. And I'm thinking about it in this. And in my experience, when people say are not connecting in the way they want to, or they have the differential desires, so one person wants to have sex more often than the other person and it's causing stress and tension, when they go to opening the relationship as a way to fix that, in my experience, it has not been effective. Because if you're not feeling connected to this person and feeling like they're meeting your needs and feeling like you can go about this in a way that's helpful, when you factor in other people, it's even less focused one-on-one attention and teamwork and problem solving together. And now you're adding in other, we'll say, players to this game, and it can complicate things. So I'm having multiple thoughts on this that I think in some ways, right, if you have that conversation going into the relationship and that's the expectation, that's totally different. But trying to solve a problem through factoring other people, especially with sex, tends to not be effective because now you are like diluting your energy to this thing even more. So
Right,
you're not
right.
giving as much energy to this person. Now there's other people that you're factoring in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. If you're using it to try and solve a problem, it is definitely an additional problem that you're adding to the relationship. But sometimes people feel like they're not doing it to solve a problem. It's just a desire that they have, and they'd like to share that with their partner. But sometimes when someone receives this information, they feel like, oh, there must be something missing in our relationship for you to be suggesting such a thing. Do you think there's any truth to that? Do you think there has to be something missing in a relationship for someone to want to open it up?
That's an interesting question because my gut says no. And when I think about what I have seen with my clients, that's where it's come from. I don't think I've ever worked with a couple who has come in and they're like, this is really great. And we just want to open it up to play out different fantasies and explore more. What I see is that they try to open up because they are trying to fix a problem. So do I believe that that can be effective if it's not problem oriented? Yeah, I hope so, at least in this world. But I hope that we are advanced enough that we can navigate that well if that's the expectation, everybody's on the same page. I just know that in my experience, especially with sex, it factors in more stress and guilt and tension and mind reading if those skills aren't there. Because that's usually what's happening, right? We struggle to have these conversations around sex and be honest about what we need and navigate this well together. So we don't even have the skills that are foundational to open things up.
Right, right. So in the case that is not based on a problem, how could someone have that conversation with their partner and let them know that it's not based on a problem that we have, but it's just for us to be able to explore more?
So that makes me think about, and I love this, I'm thinking about communication now. I love talking about talking because we think it's so simple. I say this thing and you hear this thing, and that is not how it works. Something I talk about with my clients is the difference between an avoidance mindset and a seeking mindset. So the avoidance mindset is what I don't want, right? I don't want to feel stressed out. I don't want to struggle with this thing. I don't want to hurt your feelings, whatever it is, versus the seeking mindset, which is what you want more of. And we are wired to use the avoidance mindset. We are wired to look for the things that are stressful and to avoid the things that cause us discomfort. And why that can be a trap is because we get stuck in what we don't want, which isn't actionable. If I don't want to hurt your feelings in this conversation, that's great. But what do I do with that? How do I actually go about having this conversation versus thinking about, I want to have this conversation because I want to be more open and vulnerable and troubleshoot and brainstorm ideas and find different solutions. Those are a lot more actionable. Right? So thinking about in general any changes that you want to make in a relationship or even conversations that you want to have, coming in from a place of here is what I would like and here's why can be a really helpful place to start that conversation because it also starts on a strengths-based foundation instead of, well, here's what I don't like or here's what I want to change. Here's what I want more of. Here's
Right,
what I think would be great for us. Here's what I am desiring. It's
right,
a
right.
different perspective coming in that feels more tangible too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Excellent. Yeah, so like whether it's like monogamy or non-monogamy, jealousy can always arise in a relationship. For example, in a non-monogamous relationship, it could be like you're spending more time with this partner than me. Or in a monogamous relationship, it could be like, oh, I noticed that you're talking to this person too much, or you're looking at this person. How can someone that has been accused of these things that is causing jealousy communicate to their partner that there's nothing to be jealous of? And how can the partner that's always feeling jealous about these things start to deal with their emotions of jealousy?
That is a great question because I think jealousy is such a tough emotion sometimes to navigate because it really can take over and impact how we're communicating or what we're like not communicating at all. So what that makes me think about is how none of our emotions are inherently good or bad, right? We talk about them like they are because some feel better than others, but jealousy in itself is not bad. What it does is it's identifying something to you that is important that you want, right? If I am jealous of my partner because he's spending more time with another partner, what it's telling me is that I'm desiring more connection, or I want deeper vulnerability, or I want more quality time together because that's my love language, whatever it is. So I think the diving deeper into what the jealousy is telling you is a really important part of this. Because if we just focus on the jealousy, we're not getting to why is it important, right? So what is the jealousy telling you? What is it that you're craving more of? How are you feeling about this? And really being honest, because then that can drive those conversations. As opposed to just saying, I'm jealous about this thing. That doesn't, again, it doesn't give the why, right? Like we were talking about, why is it causing me jealousy? What is it that I feel like I'm missing? What is it that I want more of? And talking about that in these conversations.
Right, right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, sometimes, like when people are feeling jealous, there's actually some truth to it because infidelity has actually happened in the relationship. Someone has stepped out of the relationship, and the partner that stepped out, tends to carry around a sense of guilt, and they want to share that with their partner about what has happened to kind of clear the air and rebuild the relationship. So some people like they receive this information and feel like, oh no, you've cheated, it's over, like there's no way back from that, and things like that. And some people are more like, okay, let's see if we can work this out. Let's have a conversation and talk about this. So, in your opinion, do you feel like the relationship can ever be rekindled and rebuilt in a constructive way, or do you feel like they're going to be just tolerating each other from that point on because the damage has already been done?
That's a really good question. I think that relationships can be rebuilt because I've seen couples go through many, many really tough things together and rebuild. And I think a caveat to that is how they go about rebuilding. Because we all bring our own stuff into relationships too. That like if we were in a relationship and you cheated on me, we would have to deal with that. But if I also have been in 10 other relationships where I've been cheated on by every other partner, I'm bringing that all into this relationship, right? It affects how I view you and our relationship, all that kind of stuff. And really what I think is important in this is that trust is a foundation of relationships. And when that trust is broken, it takes time to be rebuilt. And that is different for everybody. For some people, if they haven't been in those 10 relationships where they've been cheated on and there's a good communication and we're open about it and we're in this and we want to work on it together, we might build that trust in a little bit easier way than somebody who has that whole history and or repeated infidelities in this relationship that it takes time. And that is something that I think can be really frustrating, even with my own couples, where we don't work around infidelity specifically, but a lot of trust issues that it can be frustrating because they'll say, well, we've talked about this and I apologized. But
Mhm.
that's not what rebuilds trust, right? What rebuilds trust is putting in the time and the effort and overly communicating and being transparent about things and being patient and nurturing each other in these different ways that takes time. Like it is very easy to break trust and sometimes it takes time to rebuild it. So the process is important, right? It's not about the one-time conversation or even understanding. It's about rebuilding that together and being patient in the process.
Yeah, definitely. Just like building anything, it takes time to build it and it's very quick to destroy it, and it will take time to rebuild it if it was taken down. So yeah, like that's very insightful there. So when we're looking at like brand new relationships now, like when people embark on a brand new relationship, they tend to feel a lot of butterflies, a lot of chemistry going through their body about this new partner that they're with, and they tend to immerse themselves in this relationship, right? So some people, when they immerse themselves, they tend to lose their sense of self in the process. So in your opinion, how could people immerse themselves in a brand new relationship that they want to immerse themselves into without losing their sense of self in that process?
That's such a good question because we are wired to kind of lose ourselves a little bit in relationships because there is a lot of research around what goes on in our brains when we are new in relationships. So there's this thing called limerence, which happen it's the honeymoon phase, right? You get the butterflies every time they text you, you get excited to see each other, like there's this excitement, there's that anticipation, and studies have shown that it is literally similar in our brain to addiction. We literally get addicted to this stuff early in relationships because it's exciting and it's new and it feels good every time they call me and all that kind of stuff. So I think recognizing that that happens alone is a helpful first step because in the honeymoon, that's often where we miss red flags also because this person can do no wrong. We have the rose-colored glasses on. So I think knowing that happens and being okay, being excited, but still recognizing what is important to you is a big part of this, right? That I am somebody who values independence. So like, yes, I want to spend a lot of time together, but I also still want to have my own hobbies. Or I'm somebody who values like having shared hobbies. So yes, we need space, but I want to find things that we do together that I think recognizing what you value in relationships can help ground you because it's going to be exciting. There's going to be the wave. Of course there is. That's how we're wired. But also being honest about what it is long term that's important. Once things stabilize, how do you want this to look?
Right, right.
What is important? How do you want to show up in this? How do you want your partner to show up in this? And being honest about that. Because sometimes we miss that in the honeymoon and then we realize, oh, been in this relationship for a year, but now I don't even feel like we're a good fit together because we weren't grounding in those values.
Right, yeah, for sure. Now, you speak to different people all the time about their sex lives and different issues they have with intimacy and things like that. And there will be certain things that you see come up on a regular basis from different people. What are those things that you see in like a pattern that comes up on a regular basis? And what kind of a solution do you have for that pattern that you see on a regular?
So many patterns because at the end of the day, we are creatures of habit. So we bring a lot of patterns into this stuff. But one of the main ones that this is making me think about is the dynamic that happens in long-term relationship, especially with issues with low desire, right? Where one person has a higher drive than the other. And I'm just going to speak to this in men and women because that's usually what I'm working with. That women feel like they have a lower desire than men, is that they start to feel guilty. They start to feel really ashamed. They start to feel like my partner has to deal with this quote unquote me problem and I don't know how to fix it. And now I feel really bad, but I don't want to have sex. So now I feel guilty saying no because they feel rejected and unloved. So then I just say yes. And that reinforces this problematic dynamic in the brain, right? Like sex is not fun and it's stressful and I don't want to do it. So that's not a great thing. We want to disrupt that pattern. But the guilt is a tough one. So one of the main things I start with in disrupting this with my women is how to address when your partner seeks you out for sex without them feeling rejected, right? Without feeling like you are rejecting them. And I call it saying no to sex and yes to connection. Because what happens when your partner seeks you out is that they want to connect with you. It's not just about the sex, not just about the orgasm where they would masturbate on their own. It's that they want to connect and they want to do that with you. So in that moment, you can say, like, you can reject the sex, right? Non-verbally, but still say yes to the connection. Instead of just saying, no, I'm not in the mood, which then gives your partner no information and they're stuck mind reading and making up stories. And they're like, does this person not love me? Does she not find me attractive? Whatever it is. You say, I'm not in the mood right now, but why don't we XYZ instead? Here's a way that I would love to connect. Let's make dinner. Let's go for a walk. Let's trade massages. It doesn't matter what it is. What is important about it is that it's giving context to still step into this place of connection with your partner. You don't just have to say yes if they want to have sex and you don't want to, right? We don't want to do that. But we also don't just have to say no and reject all connection because that's not helpful either.
Right.
So you can say no to sex, but yes to the connection attempt. And that is what's really important to keep us connected and on the same page and working on this together as a team, as opposed to battling each other.
Yeah. I would even go as far as to say like all the forms of a connection are forms of foreplay as well, where it
Yes.
doesn't have to be all like touchy-feely all the time to be foreplay. It could be a lot to do with communication and gestures that are part of foreplay as well. So would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And there's been research done around like how the system works in men and women's bodies differently. And for women, they have shown, well, I'll start with men's to give you context. So for men, they've shown that about 5 minutes of non-sexual touch, right? Like 5 minutes of being around your partner or the visual stimulation, because men tend to be more visually stimulated, is enough to start to spark these arousal hormones in their body. And for women, they have found that they need 15 hours. And I tell my clients this, and they fall on the floor and they're like, I don't have 15 hours for foreplay. And I'm like, no, no, no. What that means is that all of the little things throughout the day are important because they add up or they break down.
Right.
Every time that you help each other out with the dishes or making dinner, right? Or you doing something kind, or showing a small gesture, or kissing before you go to bed, whatever it is, right? These are all connection attempts that build that up. And the reality is that for women's bodies, it just takes longer. It just works differently than men's. So that is all foreplay. Like, and I think men think it's so funny that they're like doing the dishes as foreplay. I'm like, yes, because now we're talking about mental load stuff, right? Not only are you helping out because this is also your house and like pulling your weight, but you are showing her that like you're taking something off her plate. It's one less thing that now she has to think about and clear out in her brain to context shift for sex. So yes, the foreplay goes way outside the bedroom. That is where better sex starts. All of this other stuff that happens before you ever get in bed.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Erinn, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everything that you've shared. Where could people find you, find out more about you, and find out more about what you do?
Absolutely. So my website is holistichealth.com. It's spelled a little bit funny because it's spelled like my last name. So my last name is Hoel, but it's spelled Hoel. So holistic is spelled Hoelistic. Or you can find me on Instagram. My name is Erinn Hoel. Again, it's so funny. My whole name looks like it's misspelled. It's Erinnhoel. But I have a ton of free resources. I host free master classes every month. I do free trainings because at the end of the day, my main mission is that I want women to know that they are not alone in this and there is nothing wrong with them. So any questions, please come find me, ask them. I'm here to help. Even if we never work together, I just want you to know that you're not alone in this, but there's a way out.
Excellent. And for the viewers, all the links to her socials will be in the description, so you can contact Erinn and find out more about what she does. Once again, Erinn, thank you so much for coming on. Any final words before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you for having me. I think these conversations are so hard for so many of us to have. So just being able to come and get to jam out on this stuff that I get very excited about is so wonderful. And I think this is such an important conversation. So thank you for hosting this. Thank you for having me and having these conversations. I think it's really helpful for people to just know that there's all sorts of stuff going on that is okay. It is normal. There's nothing wrong with you, and it's fine. You're going to be fine.
You're very welcome, Erinn, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll see you next time.
Take care.